Hello, welcome. My name is Francine Gordon. I'm one of the co-chairs for SDForum Tech Women. The other co-chair is Sonia London. Who comes from a further distance than I do and got caught in traffic. So we're delighted to have you all here. We had over 160 people registered. You'll have, I don't know if you'll be happy to know or not, but you're one of the privileged few. We actually turned many people away today, so which we're thrilled about. Not that they didn't get to, you know what I mean. That didn't come out quite right, did it? Anyway, SDForum is a nonprofit organization. It's been around for about 20 years and originally was the Software Development Forum. They spread their responsibilities, got more involved with everything with hardware development and high tech and biotech, et cetera. So now if you talk to the CEO, Susan Lucas Conwell, she will tell you it is the super duper forum. We are the tech women. We're all volunteers who run the SIGs and the special programs. We're one of the special programs. Our mission is to support the advancement of women in technology and to encourage girls to pursue education to prepare them for careers in technology. We're very proud of the fact that we have worked with Northrop Grumman to host or to sponsor teams now for all-girl teams for the Tech Challenge put on by the Tech Museum. We've done it for 3 years now. We have one of our women who's been involved, Veronica Hume, who has participated for 3 years, and with her partner in crime, Diana Chen, they've now set up a Tech Girls website, which I will send you information about when I send out the survey afterwards. So that's our basic mission. I'm just curious, how many people have ever been to an SDForum event before? Oh, great. And I also want to give you a brief introduction from Association of Women MBAs, Sheila Ursel.
Thank you, Francine. So hi everyone, I'm Sheila Ursal. I am the president of Association of Women MBAs. I wanted to know how many of you heard of the organization. Can you just put up your hand? Fabulous. I didn't expect so many people, but it's great to know that. And welcome. We are partnering with SDForum. We've been around for 10 years. We've done a pretty bad job of marketing ourselves, so we're trying to get better at it. And we are also a nonprofit, basically run by 10 women who are on the board. One of them happens to be here, Christina. Please stand up. She's done all the marketing work for this. So if you're here, probably because of Christina. Quick thing, we do events once a month, very similar to this, career-oriented events, and mostly in San Francisco. We're trying to move here to the South Bay and really honored to partner with SDForum and other organizations. One way you can help us is to find spaces to do events. We have some great speakers lined up. One of them being Barbara, she's right here. And we have other speakers lined up, but we are always short on finding space. So if you can help us with that. The other is we have a flyer, which is on your chair. So join us on Facebook, on LinkedIn. There are so many women just like you. And our organization, although it's for women MBAs, we actually encourage people, anybody with a master's degree, or anybody who wants to just try an event can also come and attend. So I hope to see you some other time.
Thank you. By the way, we do programs pretty much every month. Next month, May 20th, we're partnering with what's called the LSIG, the Engineering Leadership SIG, to do a program on engineering leadership. That will be a panel of men and women engineering leaders, managers, vice presidents, et cetera, who will be interviewed by Mala Devlin of Cisco, who's written a book on engineering management. So she's going to be doing that May 20th, and that's going to be at SAP. We, by the way, also are dependent on companies to host us. And next month, we actually need someone to help sponsor refreshments. So if you know, if your company is willing to provide a few $100s for that, that would be great. Come see me or Sonia. So there's Sonia. I don't know if Susan Kelleher is here, and Jenny Ho. These are the co-chairs who handle our tech girls. Patty Dock is our new director of marketing. Stand up. And we have several people who are helping us do blogging and tweeting during the event. So we always need volunteers. We can tell you a bit more about that later. When I send you after you're done, you're going to get an email tomorrow probably that's going to ask you for feedback on the event. I will include information about our LinkedIn group and about some of the other groups that we have formed because we're trying to create a community for SDForum Tech Women. And I'll also send you the link to the Tech Girls website. I'd like to thank Google for hosting us, Susan Kwok in particular. Susan is hiding out in the corner, but I'll bring her up in a minute. This has taken a lot of work to get this all put together. It's hard to imagine what she's had to do behind the scenes. And by the way, we originally had said there would be 90 people. When 168 said they were going to come, Susan did her best to get the food allotment increased, but catering needed more time. So for those of you who may not have been properly fed, there will be pizzas coming in about, I don't know, half an hour or so, because we don't want anyone to be hungry, but quite frankly, we hadn't expected such a fantastic turnout. With that, I'd like to introduce Susan. Susan is a quality engineer here at Google, and she's one of the heads of the Google Women in Engineering International, GWI, as I understand it, network. And Susan is the one who's done all this work back here at Google. So if you could talk a little bit about your group and about Google, that would be great.
All right, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Wow, this is such a big turnout. We didn't expect so many of you to be here, but we're really glad to have you here. So I've been a part of Google for almost 4.5 years now, and I'm a test engineer. So I'm not actually an event coordinator, even though I may seem like I'm doing event coordinating. And I just wanted to give a little bit of intro just to what Google does for its employees. So GWI Network, Google Women Engineers iNetwork, is actually an employee resource group here at Google. There are multiple groups here, whether it be BGN, Black Google Network, or Hispanic Network, or Greyglers, or Gayglers, a bunch of these employee resource groups. We do have just diversity backing these groups and allowing us to sponsor these types of events, to have people come on campus and have tech talks, and you know, Kathryn come on board and do tech talks like this. So I've always found Google to be a very supportive company, especially in this area in terms of supporting diversity. Anyway, without further ado, I would want to bring up Kathryn, and grab my notes here. Kathryn started out as an engineer, and she also got her MBA. She's worked at companies such as Motorola, GTE, Accenture, Scopus, and Siebel. She has done executive search for a dozen years now, and she currently does works for UCLA Anderson Business School doing counseling for alumni. And right now, she's publishing her book, which should come out shortly, and we will have a little raffle for that too, so you might get a nifty copy if you did drop your business card when you registered. Okay, and let me get Kathryn up here. Thank you. And thanks so much. Yeah.
I'm going to get started because you'll find out that I have a lot of energy and I've got a lot of information I want to share with you. But I'm going to start. We've all been summoned for jury duty, but how many have actually been on a jury before? Yeah, a few of you. I actually had an interesting experience that's relevant to this. And it goes back to the days I was in strategy consulting. So I have to put you in the context. I was working 60 plus hours a week, traveling 4 to 5 days a week. So when jury duty came, it's like, good, I get a break. And I sat on a jury, and they let us out Thursday at noon. Well, anyone that knows me knows I'm not somebody who plays hooky, but I was going to play hooky. And so I lived in Southern California at the time. My favorite thing to do was go bike riding down the beach. So I'm driving towards the beach, toward my condo near the beach. I'm going to go bike riding, got to get my car washed. Oh, what else should I do? You should be a successful businesswoman and then mentor young women. I had no idea where it came from, but it resonated with me, okay? And that's how I figured out my mission in life, driving from jury duty to the car wash, okay? Now, I start with that because today what I'm going to do is start with that career strategy and that vision, because you need that to be able to drive your decisions and where you're headed to. So it starts with that career strategy, and I'll go through that. The second thing that I'm going to go through today is career paths. As an executive recruiter, I've spent a lot of time going through thousands and thousands of resumes. Actually, for the book, I also did groundbreaking research looking at, well, what backgrounds did people come to get to VP marketing, product management, sales, CEO, and what paths did they take? So I'll take you through that. The third part of it is I'll take you through the skills needed at the top. I've been running a career development program now for 5 years with Stanford Business School and with UCLA Business School. And I interview panels of executives, panels of women. I love it when I have panels of women, 4 VPs of marketing from top Silicon Valley companies. That was a fun panel. And I summarize the information from over 125 of these speakers over the 5 years to put it into a leadership skills model of the skills you need as you're advancing in your career. And then the last part is, well, what's this all mean and how do I put it in a career development plan? And the key around that is a lot of people, if they're working in a large company with a very supportive organization, you might get career development. But many of the companies, and especially if you're unemployed or moving from startup to startup, you might not get that career development. So it's really your own responsibility to look at, how do I advance from where I am? How do I make myself resilient for the next economy? And how do I continue my own career development? So we'll help you put that into a plan. So let me start by taking you through career strategy. And this is, I'll go back to the story that I talked to you about with my own career development and how that guided the career decisions that I made. So back when I was in strategy consulting, after I figured out what that mission in life was, I figured out, okay, I have to be a successful businesswoman. Being a consultant wasn't going to get me there. And I needed to go into a company, but secret is a consultant has no functional skills whatsoever. So there were 3 different paths that I could take. Since I worked at Accenture, everybody had an engineering degree. Everybody thought I was a technical consultant, so I could go into professional services, consulting, implementing solutions. That was one path. The second one was I had done one project defining product development process for one technology company. Therefore, I knew what product managers did, so I could go into product management. That's how consultants do it. They do one project. And then the third was corporate strategy. Since I'd been doing strategy consulting, I could go into corporate strategy. But I thought about it, that would put me into an ivory tower. And I was trying to go on to run a business. And so I didn't think that would get me there, so it was my third path. Well, I ended up landing at Scopus, running the telecom vertical for product marketing and defining the products that Scopus was offering. Now, we were acquired by Siebel, and one of the things I didn't say is work-life balance was very important to me. And if anybody knows the reputation of Siebel Systems, it doesn't really have work-life balance. And so I stayed and got our product out, and then decided to go on job search, and I started that by going trekking in Nepal. That's a good place to start your job search. And the other place I started was reaching out to executive recruiters. You just let them know I'm in the job market. And one of them said, "Have you ever considered search?" I said, "No, but I'm willing to listen." And I found out that executive search was consulting, but around people. And back when we were in strategy consulting, we'd say it'd be better to have a B strategy with an A team that would execute on it. So now all of a sudden, I was working on putting that A team into companies. And guess what? I have a new way of achieving that vision of becoming a successful businesswoman and being able to mentor others. I can look at what other successful executives are doing and how they're getting into companies, why they're getting into companies, and then share that with people. So I'm here today. Okay, but you can see how that mission guided me and helped me make that decision. Otherwise, I'd say, why would I go into executive search? Now, it also guided a couple other things. I started my own executive search business during the last recession, so I decided I needed to be on a board, so why not start a women's group? So that's how we started PANW back during the last recession. And again, the goal was to help women in their development and networking. I found wonderful successors in Francine Gordon when I was having my second child and needed to step down from that role. But after my second son was a year old, I needed to do something else. So started yet another career development program in the Getting to the Top series that we started at Stanford Business School. So again, I kept doing things that followed this mission. And so I lead this life where I love everything I do because it's so connected with my core. And that's what you want with that strategy. Now, you look at this kind of drawing, and of course I'm an engineer, so I have to have some kind of process map up there. But the whole thought is, what is that direction that you want to achieve, and figuring out what that is. And that will guide you. A lot of people, I like asking that interview question of, what do you want to do in 5 to 10 years? What is that you want to do? Because that's going to guide you. And I find that if you have that direction, you're more likely to achieve that. Think about, we had one panelist that said, I want to be CEO of IBM. Okay, and her name is Shelley Archambault, if any of you know her. She's a CEO here in Silicon Valley, and she was a longtime IBM person, and she actually, while she was at IBM, she found out that every CEO had had a stint in Japan. So she decided to do a stint in Japan. Well, if anybody's met her, she's a 6-foot-tall African-American woman going to Japan. And even her mentor said, you got a lot of challenges in front of you. Good thing you're bright. And so she went off to Japan. Well, over the course of her career, she realized, well, I still want to be CEO, but she was getting further away from what she wanted to be doing. She liked working with the customer and being closer to it. And the more bureaucratic and higher up in a large organization she got, it all became people issues, internal issues. And so she decided she didn't want to do that. She moved to the West Coast as president of Blockbuster.com, and then she moved on and she's CEO of MetricStream today. So she still had that vision of, I want to be a CEO of IBM. It changed, and she wanted to become CEO of something else. So it'll change a couple times over your life. In fact, Lily Pratt-King, who's sitting in our audience, she's a career coach and extraordinaire, I should say. And Lily was one of the panelists also, and she quoted one of the professors from Stanford, said, you'll probably end up repotting yourself 9 times during your career. And I think I'm up to about 7 right now. So, but you will go through that. So that long-term goal will change, but if you have something that's driving it, you'll keep achieving it. And the example I give is, how many friends have you had that say, I'm going to run a marathon, and they're the people that don't even park at the far side of the parking lot, okay? And then the next thing you know, 3 months later, they've run a marathon. But because they stated that goal, they're going to achieve it. So the first thing is figuring out what is that long-term direction that you want to achieve. Now, then the other part is, there are my process flow map here. There's 4 pivot points in that transition. The first one is level and getting that promotion from manager to director and VP. The second part, sometimes you have to take the lateral moves to move up, the side step to move up or the down to move up. And so you can take a lateral move into a new function, maybe moving from engineering to pre-sales, consulting, to IT, to marketing, to sales. That'd be a great one to go into, and making that lateral move. You can also move companies. We have a lot of people in Silicon Valley that do move by going in between company. And then the fourth one is new industry. And that's not necessarily new company, because even when I left Siebel Systems, they said, well, we're starting all these new verticals. You could run the utility vertical. So you can take on new industry expertise, like if you want clean tech, do it within your own company and branch out into those things within your own company. Now, when you're making these steps within your career, anytime you're trying to do a transition that goes over 1, it's much easier than going 2 or 3 at the same time. So if you are moving between companies, it's why the employers really want someone who's been there, done that. It's harder if you're trying to change to get a promotion or changing functions while you're changing companies. So those are the kinds of things you have to be mindful of as you're starting to put together that plan to get to that goal. Now, the next part of it, I want to take you through is some of the groundbreaking research, because I did look at what does it take to get there. Now, I wanted to get a show of hands. How many engineers do we have in the room? Okay, number of engineers. How about IT folks? IT, marketing, product management, product marketing, sales, wow, HR, biz dev alliances. What did I miss? Ops, that's a good one. Oh, good, thank you. Manufacturing fits in there. Anything else? Oh, accounting, finance, I forgot. This is a really well-balanced audience here. This is great. So anyway, I pulled together product management and brought the data on that. What I found in interviewing these panels, it'd be 4 people, but I'd still see that they came from different backgrounds. So you'd have the product managers that were the engineers that became product managers. I'd also see that some salespeople had gone into it, or the one that I like is the domain. So this is the person who was very deep in an area. You know, maybe it was telecom, like my background was telecom, and then I became product marketing and telecom. Well, if I had continued in a career and started going into mobile and other things, you might look at me and say, oh, she's got this telecom domain expertise. And you can see it across industry, but you can also see it within a function. Like in marketing, maybe it's somebody who's really good at social media marketing, or somebody who's really good at lead generation campaigns. You know, maybe it's somebody, I've done searches on so many different domains. So even within software industry, it's, you know, I need to find someone who does not only middleware or something like that, but service-oriented architecture, and it gets deeper and deeper. And what I've learned in search, and when you're job searching, you know, write this down, everybody wants somebody with that deep domain. And one of the big mistakes people make is they try and be generalists because they don't want to miss out on an opportunity. But you have to be niche oriented for this person, and niche oriented for that, and niche oriented there. And they're looking to make sure you've got the right industry functional, whatever that domain is. And so there were product managers who sat there with deep domain experience. There were also some consultants that went into product management. So you see the different categories. You know, 1/3 of the people came up through product management. You have the strategy consultants and bankers fit in there, and 22% came from that background. Engineers made up 20%. The numbers aren't as important as looking at it and seeing the different backgrounds people came from. So if you're an engineer going into product management, as you're positioning yourself moving up, you'll want to find the positions where people are valuing that you have deep technical skills. But also you need to keep an eye on, if I've got deep technical skills and I'm competing against people with really good sales and marketing skills or analytical skills, how do I start learning what they're doing to be able to enhance my background? So start using that to position yourself. Okay, the next one. I have to bring up the CEO part of it. I had a question the other day as I presented. They said, oh, well, the CEO function, I'm guessing there's a lot of engineer CEOs. I looked down and said, well, au contraire, you know, less than 15%. And it makes sense. There's sales and marketing. 1/3 of them come from sales and marketing backgrounds. And it's because the CEO of those tech startups is the #1 salesperson in the company. And guess what? If you're a technology co-founder, you're usually, and the tech person, the engineer that's developing it, you may end up running into and becoming that CTO co-founder. You still are the co-founder, but you'll hire in people that can do the other parts of it. So I just wanted to point that part of this out to you. Now, I have breakout sessions. You guys get to work tonight. Okay, and the reason for this is I want to have a context. I want you to have a context so that you can think about this for your own self, so that as you walk away tonight, you're going to be able to think about, what do I want to work on? So we're going to spend 10 minutes, and yes, I need you to come back to me in 10 minutes, so I'll try and get you. Actually, when I start doing it, whoever comes back and listens, I'll give one of these away. Okay, so anyway, we're going to spend 10 minutes and break out into groups of 3 or 4, and I want you to introduce yourself. So if you're sitting around people you work with, go find new people you don't know, okay? And I want you, one, to introduce yourself with a 15-second pitch, and I'm going to give you an example because we all give 30-second to a minute pitches. It's Hi, I'm a product manager in mobile applications. I developed something like this app you might have. And if you're looking for a job, you can say, and I'm looking for a job at companies like Google or Microsoft. That's your introduction, short and sweet. But then the second part is the most important. Why don't you just share with this group if you've got any thoughts on where you want to be? What's your dream, your vision? Maybe it's even just a pipe dream. But if you've got a thought on where you think you're going to be headed with your career, whether it's just your next job, or even better if it's longer term. So we're going to spend 10 minutes doing this, and I'll get you back together. So go ahead and find a small group. That was just to give you some context so that you've got a direction that you're thinking of. Because with that thought process, the next part is going into the leadership skills model. And I called it a career pyramid because the graphics look pretty, of skills at the top, and there's 5 that I'm going to talk about. And I can give you examples for the next 3 hours on this, okay? But we're only going to spend 30 minutes. So the first one is strategic vision. We learn about this in business school, so I'll probably go through it pretty quickly. Customer perspective. You've got to bring the customer perspective into your job, whether it's external or internal customers, and how do you do that? It's kind of interesting because you wouldn't expect to see that up there, but it was very interesting how all of the panelists talked about who their customer is, from CEOs talking about shareholders to VPs of marketing bringing that information into the company. So I'll take you through examples of that. Communication skills. So there's a reason why communication skills is 4 times larger than any other part in here. The importance of communication skills grows exponentially as you advance in your career, so get good at it. And I'm going to take you through some examples of that. Team leadership, we'll go through that as well. That's one that I think we can all work on. And the last one, just to surprise you, is called distinguishing skills. So as you move through your career, we go from doing to leading. What's really interesting is you get rewarded for doing. And then when you get to the point of you get rewarded for leading, well, you're not supposed to be doing quite as much. But there were some skills, since remember I took this functional perspective looking at marketing and product management and sales and CEO, I looked at it and I saw there were some things that you had to continue doing really, really well. And the example I use is, if you're a VP Biz Dev, you're negotiating $2 billion deals. Well, you don't walk in and start negotiating at a $2 billion level. You better start here and get really good at it because you're never going to be able to delegate that. So what is the distinguishing skill for the functional area that you're looking at? Okay, and I'm going to go through these with lots of examples. Strategic vision. So this is not only setting the strategic vision for the company, but it's also setting it for your division, your product, your team, and then getting everybody in alignment with it. So it's not just the setting the vision, but it's the alignment and how do you communicate that and making sure the alignment of your product or team fits with the company direction as well. Now, a couple examples of that, because it's not just the company vision. Marlene Williamson is a VP of marketing. She was at Symantec, and then now she's at Ericsson, Redback Networks, a part of Ericsson. And she was has been a marketeer in Silicon Valley for 25 years. She was a candidate of mine 10 years ago. And she was a VP of marketing at Acer. So I'm dating myself. How many people remember PC clones and Clone Wars? Okay, there's a few of us. Thanks, guys. Anyway, back then, for the people that didn't know this, you bought IBM. You couldn't go wrong buying IBM computers. Or you bought HP, Compaq was separate, Dell, I think they were around. And once you got past the kind of big guys, the PC clones had a really poor reputation. They were very cheap. Well, Marlene put together the marketing vision that put Acer on the map, and Acer became the clone to buy. So if you didn't want to go IBM, you bought Acer. And she built that up and set that marketing vision of what do we do to do that. And that takes a lot of vision to be able to do that, and then the execution behind it. Now, the other example I bring up is Erna Arneson is a VP of Strategic Alliances, again from Symantec, and she's with Cisco now. And when you hear Erna talk, she's been in strategic alliances, partnerships for 25 years. She has this mind that thinks strategically about partner ecosystems and how do we work together to create value for one another. And it's this very strategic mindset that I don't think strategically around partners the same way she does, but it's having that kind of strategic vision. Now, I also want to talk about alignment, because in alignment, it's communicating and over-communicating. The CEOs would say, if you think you're communicating a lot, the vision, well, you're probably not communicating enough, so keep over-communicating. An example, one of the CEOs, or one of the executives shared with us, he had been an executive at Pacific Telesis, Pac Bell, some iteration of that. And they had an industry luminary come in at an executive level in the group. Marty Kaplan was his name. And he came on board and he went around and talked to all the division leaders about what's going on in the organization. And he came up with this list of 85 things. And after about a year with the group, he's going, what's happening with the performance here? Why are we not hitting our numbers? And he pulled one of his managers aside. You got to tell me what's going on. What am I missing? He goes, well, we're all working on your list of 85. And Marty had to say, my list of what? And he had to get up and publicly in front of the group, tear up that list of 85 so they could go back to their knitting and concentrate on profit, revenue, and all the basics. And so they lost sight of what that vision was because of this little list of 85. Because sometimes if the leader says it, everybody thinks they need to jump through hoops and do it. So as the leader, the strong leaders and the executives that were quoted in the book, they gave countless examples of you always knew where you stood in the company because the CEO said, this is our objective, 1, 2, and 3, and from the top down to the bottom of the organization, they could cite that. Very interesting. UCLA Anderson just honored Fred Smith, the CEO of FedEx, and he talked about how the mission of the company from top of the organization down to the bottom of the organization, it was all about how we're delivering packages to satisfy our customers and to take care of our customers. Well, that evening at the dinner, they surprised him, and they were going to have a FedEx delivery man who worked the graveyard shift at LAX terminal, was going to ring the doorbell and bring in his package, okay? I sat next to this nice young man at the dinner table, and I said, how do you motivate people on a graveyard shift? He goes, well, it's all about the customer. And I'm going, I thought I was sitting next to Fred Smith right there. So all the way down to probably 10 levels down in the organization, they knew what their job was in taking care of the customer. That's setting a vision and getting alignment through the organization. Okay, second one, customer perspective. This is a commandment, know thy customer, okay? It came out so many times. Now, a lot of the panels were marketing and sales oriented, but it was so apparent that it was know thy customer. Now, this is external if it's the customers buying your product, but it could also be internal if you have to, the tech support guys who are setting us up, the security people who are supporting the events that are going on. Who is your customer within the organization? Now, a few examples here. Judy Kirkpatrick was a VP at eBay, and before that worked at Intuit and Adobe in her career. And she talked to us about eBay and what it meant to bring in customer perspective there. And A.G. Lafley, he's the chairman of P&G. They had a saying that they translated to their own. And A.G. Lafley would say, you stand for election. The customer we stand for election when the customer buys and when they use the customer. So think about that laundry detergent you just bought from Procter & Gamble. It's when you buy it, but then you have to use it, and then you have to go out and buy it again, okay? So for eBay, that meant to them every time a customer clicked and bought, every time somebody came on board and sold something and then would come back and sell again. So the customer perspective was that whole user experience, not just buying up front, but using it going through customer service and operations and going back and telling everybody about it and buying again. So how do you bring that customer perspective in? Because you're touching the customer. You know, even if you're sitting in finance or some groups like that, what is the impact that you have on it? The second example that Judy Kirkpatrick shared with us, she had worked at Intuit, and Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, shared something early on. Now everybody knows Intuit and Quicken, and so Quicken was invented to be an electronic checkbook, so you could balance your checks, and that's how it was used. So during the first 2 years, they did a lot of home visits to see how people were using the product. And they went in and they found out that a lot of people were using it for small businesses, but they ignored the data for 2 years. And they finally said, well, maybe we should do something about this. And so they actually then started going after small and medium businesses. Well, Intuit, if you guys know Intuit, they now are, I think it's half their businesses targeting small and medium businesses with their QuickBooks product. And not only that, but they're known because they target small and medium businesses, and there aren't that many companies that do it as well as Intuit. But they ignored the customer data for 2 whole years. Now, another example, I want to take you through how people get this customer perspective, because you might say, well, I'm sitting in customer service, I'm sitting in, whatever the group is, how do I learn about sales and how do I get closer to the customer? Rita Yorfito was a VP of product management at PeopleSoft, but she started out in customer support and consulting, and she wanted to learn more about sales, so she picked the best salesperson in the company, and she said, could I learn about sales and come out and on some sales calls with you? As she put it, she glommed onto sales. And that's how she learned. And then she took that knowledge of sales and it propelled her throughout her career because everybody knew that she was so close to sales with everything she did. So that's how she got some of her promotions. Now, another person, I worked with Ann Klein at Siebel Systems. She ran the healthcare and insurance vertical. Remember, domain? She had that domain. So she ran that vertical, and what she did, Ann was really good at supporting sales. We all spend time developing our products. And along with developing her products, she spent several months developing the sales demonstration tool. And anybody that's done that, if they're on the sales engineers who are going out and giving the demos on the product, well, the hardest thing is putting in demo data and the process flows of how the customers will use it. So Ann's team spent 3 months developing a really well thought out sales tool with demo data added to it. Now, what ended up happening is not only did all the insurance and healthcare salespeople use this, but they started using it for all the other verticals, and they started selling more of their product because it had the process flows mapped. And in addition to that, because she had helped sales would give her information so they could develop better products for those customers. So she developed really good applications because she was helping sales sell product. Okay, so think about those kind of examples when you're thinking about how do I support sales and how do I learn more about it. I actually think that the MBA curriculum doesn't prepare you enough for sales, so anytime you can sit closer to sales and bring in revenue and help people bring in revenue, I think it will help out in your career. It's a blanket statement, but I don't make those often, and that's one I really believe in. Communication skills. Okay, how many people have ever gone to communication skills training? I hope that everybody's hand in this room goes up. I found that every time I join a new company, they send you to some sort of conflict resolution or it's not saying anything about me, is it? But anyway, or what's your communications? I'm a tiger, I'm blue, I'm red for this one. And every single company I go to, they've got one. But the important thing about it is it's understanding how am I perceived by someone else? How do they listen? What's their style? And how can I make myself heard by them better or listen better or work better with them? And that's kind of at the fundamental of the communication skills. It starts with listening. I have to share, the VP of Corporate Development of Amgen said this. He's a former McKinsey strategy consultant. He said, the higher up I've gotten, the more sunshine I get. And he said, everybody's delivering sunshine. No one wants to deliver the bad messages about what's going on. So as an executive, you have to get good at understanding what are they really trying to tell you with all that sunshine. And that takes listening. How can you listen so you can hear what they're saying? The other parts of it is we think about communicating down to the team. Well, a lot of the communications is the cross-functional teams, and how do you communicate across the organization? It's also communicating up to your boss. I got a call yesterday from one of my colleagues about that. How do I work with my boss and communicate this? A couple of the examples I want to bring up. We had a SDForum program, a Getting to the Top panel, I think it was several years ago now, of CIOs. And we had the CIO of Varian, Jessica Dencor, said she's an introverted person. She'll even tell you that. And she realized she'd get into these meetings with all the other executives, and she'd say, everybody would steal my ideas because I wouldn't speak up, because she was a little quiet about speaking up. So she learned to deal with it. She goes into a meeting and she speaks first, so no one can steal her ideas. So, it's if you find out, this is my trait, well, find ways to deal with that and come up with ways that you can improve upon it. Another woman, Lorraine Siegel's an incredible woman. She comes from Strategic Alliances, and she founded the Committee of 200. There's an organization called National Association of Women Business Owners for women's business owners, like myself, Francine, others in here. Committee of 200 is the women who run companies with at least 50 million in revenue. So I got to go to one once, but I'm not a member. Anyway, Lorraine started that, and so she's run several large companies. Well, she talked about when she got into her first larger company, she talked about the politics of running a board, and she said that 50% of her time was spent communicating up to the board and getting them in agreement and getting things worked out before the board meetings. And so you have to have those skills. Another woman, Trish Halamandaris, is VP of Marketing, ran the mobile at Walt Disney, and she gave strategies on how you communicate with your boss, because it happens at all levels. And so she talked about, going back to what we said, it's like, what does your boss want to hear from you? Not delivering sunshine all the time, but how can you be delivering that message so they understand what you're trying to tell them? And a lot of it comes back to these communication styles. One of the other things in there is influencing. It's really important that you work on this influencing and gaining credibility with others. Tracy Eiler is a VP of Public Relations and was with Postini. I think that was acquired here by Google. And now she's VP of MarkLogic. And she talked about early on, she talked about the need to develop this trusted relationship so that if a CEO, or even think of it's a colleague, you're in marketing and you're talking to engineer sales, you have to have credibility with them so that they understand the counsel you're trying to deliver to them. And Tracy talked about early in her career, she was asked to run a press release about a Minnesota office. Against her better judgment, because she said, why are we doing that? Shouldn't we be talking about global expansion? She ran this press release saying, hey, we've got a new office in Minnesota. She became the laughingstock of the media world because they said, hey, I'm up here in Minneapolis, and it turned out it was a guy in his bedroom, and they did a press release on the national newswire about this new office. So now she tells all her team, no Minnesota press releases, but they can only deliver that because they have gained credibility. And what she ends up doing with her team is, they gain the credibility, and instead they'll say, well, instead of a press release, why don't we do this, which will get those kind of results? And it becomes this trusted relationship with the executives that they're working with. Another part of this communications that I put in there is managing expectations. We had Melissa Deardahl on the panel, and Melissa was a VP of marketing at Adobe. Now, she was there for 8, 10, 12 years. I can't remember the number, but the typical VP of marketing in Silicon Valley is there about 18 months. And so she was there for a long time. So I asked, so what was the key to your longevity there? And she said, managing expectations, communicating what you're capable of doing and then showing people those results. So really working on managing the expectations of what people think you're going to be delivering. So you see how there's all of this kind of figuring out how to deliver the messages, how to build up relationships and work with other people on this communications. I strongly recommend that you work on it, take classes, do 360-degree reviews to see how you are perceived by your team. Team leadership. This is a fun one. It starts with hiring the best. As a recruiter, I have to say that. So there's an adage, A players hire A, and B people hire C. And that's what ends up happening. So if an A person hires an A, you've got a team of A people, you Googleites here. I also had pleasure to work at, my first consulting project was with Frito-Lay, which is PepsiCo, all A players, just fascinating working there. Also had a chance to do a consulting assignment. I process mapped all of Microsoft in 2 weeks. They're all A players up there. Worked at Siebel System, all A players. Really fun working within that environment. What happens when you get to the organizations that are B, they start getting marginalized. And if you've ever had a B boss, they don't want to get challenged and they don't want somebody to look better. So they start hiring lower than they are. And it gets really, really frustrating in those kind of environments. I had one client where, as I put it, the B+ players were real stars in it because the C, D, and E people had to go to work somewhere. And you could see how marginalized the company had become. It was, a little lower level blue collar kind of a company. But you want to hire the best. I have this one quote, I have to read it. Jasmine Kim was in charge of international for Yahoo. And came from consumer packaged goods, brand management, and then became COO, CMO of BabyCenter.com for Johnson & Johnson. She said, "I'd rather corral racehorses than motivate donkeys to walk." Okay, so stick around with those racehorses and hire the best. Nina Smith was the chief marketing officer of Xerox, and she also said, don't be too proud. You need to fill in your weaknesses. So you need to know the areas where you're not strong and make sure you're hiring for that. So many times we're hiring and you hire people who are just like you. Sometimes you have to hire somebody that adds a new perspective, not to challenge it and make the team dysfunctional, but somebody that'll add that perspective or round out the skill sets. If you're very analytical, maybe you need somebody who's people oriented, those kinds of differences in staff that you're hiring. The other part, after you bring these people in, you have to continue developing them or send them to getting to the top or things like that. The next part is also delegating and empowering. As you move up from that doing to leading, the hardest part is the letting go of details. I actually had an MBA approach me that he was director of corporate development for $1 billion company. He said, I can talk to M&A people all day long, do all these high-level deals. They just gave me a team, and I am sinking. I'm absolutely underwater. It's the busiest I've ever been in my life. I feel like I'm failure. And what it was he could communicate with bankers, couldn't communicate with his team, and on top of it, he couldn't let go of the details. And Marlene Williamson put it best when she says, you have to get comfortable in this gray area, that you're going to let go of the details. They're not going to do it the same way you've done, but if you hire those racehorses and that A team of people, just trust that they're going to get it done. Maybe not in the same area, but you have to let go of the details of how they're going to do it and delegate. Now, then the other part that I have to tell you, over the course of 5 years, we've probably run 10 CEO panels, 8 to 10 CEO panels. Every single one of the CEOs has said that the biggest mistake they've ever made is not firing quickly enough. And it's very, very telling. While I was writing this book, I hired an admin that after 3 weeks I realized there was too much emotional baggage for my home office, and I needed to let her go, but I was going on vacation over 4th of July, so it'd be good if she's here. And it took me 3 months to let her go, and I should have let her go after 3 weeks. So even I did the same thing while I'm writing these chapters here. There was one example also of a CEO, a young CEO, who talked about they had a product release coming up. And the VP of engineering came in and said, and he held a lot of the power around this. And he came in and he said, well, we'll hit the delivery date if you pay me X tens of thousands of dollars. And the CEO, well, they don't prepare you for that. And he said, I've got to think about it overnight. Well, word got out in the company that this decision was going on. He was talking to the board members. He said, you know, I knew the decision was right the minute I made it up in my mind. He, of course, fired the person. The entire team rallied because they were glad the guy was gone. And they didn't make the date, but the CEO, it was more important, the integrity of the company, the team. Can you imagine every other person that would try holding him hostage after that? And so, you know, that's one of the examples. Some of the other examples that people shared were, it's, you know, like it's easy firing the poor performers, the non-performers, but the very marginal people that are just taking up seats, a lot of times they helped you on your way up to the top, and then you've got to turn around and fire them. They also talked about, you know, like, okay, you can put them on performance plans, but they all said that the performance plans really didn't work. So they said just be generous on the way out and help them leave with dignity, but fire them. So that was the general word of the CEOs, and it was across the board, every single program. Not on a down note. We'll move on to the next one, which is the distinguishing skills. So in the distinguishing skills, this is the one where you have to get really good at something, whatever it is. We had examples of how the PR folks at the low levels are writing press releases. At the high levels, they're expected to write newsworthy stories that are changing how the market, changing and developing market categories or new stories. In driving sales, we already talked about the salesperson, has to drive sales, but the CEO is the #1 salesperson. And how can you do that? We talk about establishing culture, and you think the CEO is responsible for that. Those are all people issues again. But it also, establishing a culture could be in your group. When I was president of PANW, we went into one technology company and they said, we'd love to see more women here. We don't have a woman-friendly culture, except in one group. So we got talking about that one group. What makes that one a woman-friendly culture? It was a soccer dad who led it, and he let all the moms go, if the kids were sick, they could go home, they could take them to the appointments they needed to, because they knew they'd work, and that group was 50% women. So in this tech company that didn't have a friendly women's culture, this one group did. We always hear culture starts at the top, but it can even start at the top with you, in your team, in your group, establishing that culture. So figure out what the distinguishing skills might be for you, and we'll move on from there, and how do you develop those in your career. I do have one breakout session, but you're going to do this at the end because I want to take questions. So the next part would be to think about what are some of the skills that you want to develop. So go back over that pyramid and think about, are there one or two? Everybody should have some sort of communication skill on that list, but what are a couple skills that you want to develop? And if you want to meet with your groups or talk about it afterwards, but I want to get to some questions. So we're going to go on and take the last slide here, which is how do you develop these? Now, when you want to change behavior, the first thing, they always talk about there's 4 phases. And the first one is unconscious incompetence. You don't even know you're bad, okay? And then you move up to conscious incompetence. You know that you're not doing something well. And then you can start improving your behavior and you become consciously competent. You know you're doing well, but you still have to work at it. And the goal of nirvana is unconsciously competent. You just do it. Now, I have to give you the example I use is, anybody who knows me doesn't know me as this person, but back in college in engineering, I was shy. I was really painfully shy. And It was coming home from sophomore year, those first really killer engineering classes, and how I didn't have any friends in my class. And my dad said to me, he said, "Did you ever think that people might think you're stuck up?" I'm going, "I'm shy, Dad, I'm shy." And I went back after Thanksgiving, and I looked around all this class of people who I thought weren't talking to me because they were better than me. I looked around, I saw a whole room full of shy engineers. And so I started kicking myself. You know, you could see the foot go in my head, but I started kicking myself to talk to people. And it started with, "Hi, did you do the homework? What'd you think?" And pretty soon, we had the 2 or 3 rows around me. We actually became best friends for the next 3 years because I just kept kicking myself. And it probably took a year or 2 of kicking myself. And every now and then I did like sitting in the back of the room and just watching. But I kicked myself so that I don't think about it. And I look at my sister, never got that. She never kicked herself, so she's still painfully shy. But it's something that it was a behavior I didn't like. And I wanted to change that because I felt like I was missing something or whatever it was. But I wanted to change it. So it starts with recognizing what is that behavior, what is that skill that you want to change. And then you need to want it bad enough because it's easier just sitting there and not talking to someone and continuing with it. But what is that behavior you want to change? And then what you do is the developmental people put learning into 3 categories. The first one is experience. You have to do it to learn it. The second category is exposure. It's your networks, it's the people around you. And then the third category is education, going out and taking a class. Well, they actually say that learning comes, 60-70% of it comes from experience and just doing it. So what they recommend doing is, you know, if you're ever asked to take on a special assignment, or even better yet, volunteer to take on a special assignment. Jasmine Kim in the international group realized there was a titling issue between different countries. Some were VPs, some were directors. It was causing terrible strife within the group. She volunteered to take on a leveling project. That would be a godforsaken project because you'd have a lot of people hating you on it. But she learned a lot about HR processes and things that she really, really enjoys and worked on this pretty high profile project within the company. Another example of that was Denise Peck is a VP at Cisco. She started at Sun, and along the way she was in marketing, but she was asked to take on investor relations. These are the people who are communicating your stock price and what's going on to Wall Street. She goes, that's a finance function. Why am I doing it? So she took the principles of marketing and applied them to investor relations, you know, all legitimately, but their stock price went up. And because of that, she had a whole bunch of executives who knew who she was. Well, along the way, she also took a role in IT. She knew nothing about IT, and she decided to go to IT. Why? Because IT was the customers for Sun and Cisco products. So she got to have lunch and talk to these people and learn what the customers are thinking and how they feel about it and what their impressions are, so she can do a better job of marketing to them. And currently she's over in Shanghai running operations in China for Cisco, and she credits all of those rotational moves into different functions. Plus, she developed a lot of political allies within the company that knew how good a job she does. So you take on those experiences, even if they get you outside your comfort zone. Another example of that with PANW, I love this example because you can take on volunteer assignments, you know, work for the nonprofits and, you know, do the blogging and tweeting and you learn social media, right? Well, we had one volunteer who desperately wanted to be a manager, but she was, you know, faced with that catch-22, I say, of, well, have you ever managed anyone? No. Well, then you can't be a manager. So she needed to manage someone. So she volunteered to lead a team on the biggest team, the auction team, and did a bang-up job. She went into the job interview situation saying, have you ever managed anyone? Well, yes, I did this great team for PANW, and she got a manager title and managed 1 or 2 people. So she got that check mark by doing volunteer work. So it's taking on those projects, volunteering to do them, reaching outside your comfort zone, and taking risks. Next part of it is exposure. Penny Hersher was another one of our panelists who's CEO of First Rain, and she came up through Cadence. She was CEO of Synopsys, which was acquired by Cadence. Well, Penny started out as a math major, and a mentor said, well, go into programming. So she went into programming. Along the way, somebody said, you'd be good at marketing, go into marketing. Another mentor said, you'd make a good CEO someday. So she always had these mentors kind of helping her prepare for those roles along the way. So seek out mentors. And if your organization isn't large enough, reach out into professional associations where you might get exposure to other women or other executives in your industry. And then the last part, take courses. I know there's a lot of development courses around for people, whether in your company or outside. So what I want people to do is just think about where their long-term direction is. What are a few skills that you think you can work on developing? And then start thinking about what activities can I do to start developing it. And what I did was I left you a little worksheet you can fill out afterwards. But with that, I want to take questions. Go ahead. Wait, we have a mic for questions.
I'm sure I'm so loud they can hear me.
They have in San Francisco and
So,
around the world.
hi. Hi, my name is Luciana. I work at Adobe System as a business manager for the globalization team. And my question, I was actually wondering if your research, did you take a look of how long those women take from moving from one leading position to the next? So how long they take average from a manager to a director to a VP, or something like that?
That's a good question. I didn't study that. I have to write another book.
Homework for you.
No, I'm sorry I didn't look at that. I would say that some people did it very quickly, if I'm just kind of thinking through the executives, where you could see they moved up very quickly. But I've also interviewed people who moved up way too quickly. And I think that you do have this kind of natural development curriculum that if you do get up to the VP really, really quickly, you better be learning those skills and backfilling what you didn't learn. And I think that if you are moving along, it's seeking out people who know you that can help you and deliver advice on like what kinds of things should I be working on to advance to the next level. One of the things, this was a good one that I was taught after the fact. You know how we all have performance evaluations quarterly and no one ever does them, and then annually you get surprised? Well, someone said, why don't you talk to your boss monthly and just say, and how am I doing? And it can be really informally. Is there anything else I could be working on? Here's what I've been working on. Is there anything else? Usually they'll say, oh, no, you're doing a good job. Do it monthly. Keep track and say every single time, is there anything else I should be working on? At the end of the year, when they surprise you with that performance evaluation, you can come back and say, well, every month I've been asking you and you've been saying, no, there's nothing else I needed to be working on. Okay? But put in place that plan that says, I'd really like to be director, I'd like to be VP. What are the things that I could work on? And you have to watch out, because I think a lot of us do have an Achilles heel, and I've watched some women go from company to company to company, and they've still got that Achilles heel, and changing environments won't change that. You've got to fix what it is so that you don't keep running into it. And so if you can face that, maybe do a 360-degree assessment and figure out what it is that is holding you back, especially if you've got close friends or people that can kind of share that may not be your direct supervisor. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Alexia Doe. I work for Telenav. It's a GPS nav company. So my question is, a lot of the topics that you've brought up talk about personal development, things that women can do for themselves, but I'm wondering how many of the VPs, the CEOs, those that get to the top, in terms of their environmental situations, such as having 2 nannies, having a spouse that, maybe having the lesser job, or, those things that are equally important to enable women to get to the top. Did you look into those factors as well?
Yeah, let me address that from a few different dimensions. I'm going to start by saying when I was in strategy consulting complaining about how I was running errands every weekend in between those trips out of town, he said, Kathy, what you need is a housewife. And it was true. There are CEOs, men and women, because there's an interesting fact out there that men actually want balance and flexibility as much as women, but there's actually a bigger stigma on men in getting it. So the men want that. And what I have seen is they end up setting boundaries if they're good at it. Now, some aren't. And remember, it's about how they set culture. So I'll compare and contrast two. These are both male CEOs, but I'll take you through some women in a second. So with the male CEOs, one said, okay, I have this agreement, he's got young kids and he has an agreement with his wife that these are the nights I'm working late, but these nights I'm going to be home. And then after the kids are in bed, I go back to work till midnight or whatever it is. But he has that agreement that these are the nights that I work late. So he just sets those boundaries, but family's really important to him. Another CEO, compare and contrast this, he's sending emails to his team at midnight, 1 a.m. in the morning, and he's kind of testing them to see who else is working at those hours, okay? And so you have to know who you're working for. Now, I have run into a lot of, call them VP marketing caliber talent that have just decided, I'm tired of that revolving door of changing every 18 months. And benefits, flexibility, I'm a single mom, whatever it is, says, I'm just going to take a director of marketing title and let that VP over me keep changing. And one woman did that during the dot-com recession, watched 4 VPs of marketing go over her, and she kept her head down and just did this because she needed the health benefits for her husband. Or another one did it because she was a single mom and needed to stay at home. So there's nothing wrong. There's actually, the career theorists will call this, you have to set, what does success mean for me? And what do I want to give and what's most important? And you'll go through periods of your life where it may be more important to take care of family, and then there's another period where you ramp up your career, or you trade off because now it's time for your spouse to ramp up their career and you're doing the more flexible thing, and then you trade off. And those are all the things you have to think through.
So, hi, my name is Yen.
Oh, well, one and then...
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Yen.
Oh, me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Yen. I work for LPC Tools. And my question is, I started in the workforce about 20 years ago, and at the time, women were coming up, but there was a stereotype about executive women, how they had to sell their souls in certain ways and become more men-like. Have you studied on, I know there are more women executives these days, but I really haven't run into a lot who have not had to pretend to be more manly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I have a generalization, and it's not a study, but actually I think Catalyst does more work around kind of perceptions around that. I think it's generational. I'm the very last year of baby boomer, and I see this kind of half generation ahead of me, because I didn't like wearing the little ties, so I wore the blouses that I didn't have to wear a tie with because I really didn't like the ties. But anyway, there's this generation above me that there's almost 2 categories of women, some that really, really support women. Carol Bartz is a perfect example of that wholeheartedly supports women and their advancement in corporations. There's other women, and I'm not going to mention their names, that they're not as supportive, that they don't feel like they have to support women because they compete in a man's world. And I think that you see that in what you're talking about in I have to be more man-like. I love wearing skirts, and I will be feminine in what I do. I have to be the career person, so I'm wearing pinstripe tonight, but it's a feminine one, right? Anyway, but it's one of those things that I think it's your own personal style, but I really do like the women who do reach out and help other women. And I do encourage you to do that because I think that's how we'll all get ahead. In the back, we had a question.
So my question was going back to your comments on performance evaluations. At what point do you broach that topic with your supervisor, with your manager?
Give me a little more.
So some companies, I mean, I've worked for public accounting where there were specific programs, very formal programs about having a mentor, and there were partners who would approach you wanting to see, well, how far do you want to go, and I'll help you. Then have gone to corporate situations where you had to really find someone on your own to be your mentor or help you find your path at the company. But at what point, I guess in corporate situations, do you broach those topics with the VP or the SVP saying, I would like to go further, how do I get there?
In that conversation, I think that first you have to start it with your boss, because it's only polite to start it with your direct supervisor. However, if that doesn't go anywhere, like the conversation I had yesterday, she's being stonewalled by her boss and he closes the door and won't speak to her. And I'm going, okay. And that becomes, how do you move to the next level and what's appropriate and what are different ways you can do that? Now, as far as the reaching out, I've been in corporate situations also that I have informal mentors where I just approach people and say, you know, it's been real helpful, the advice you've given me. Would you be my mentor? And it's this kind of explicit verbal contract. But then I've also had programs where it's been, here's the mentoring program, sign up, they match you. And I found that I have more success in the informal, me just approaching somebody about it, because it's somebody I already have a relationship with. They've already provided advice. And as long as you don't step over that line of mentoring versus you really need a coach, you know, mentors can't do that. I think it works out. Now, the formal mentoring programs, to me, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I just happened to be in one where it really didn't work that well because, you know, I chose a mentor that everybody wanted to have as a mentor because she was good at mentoring, but I didn't have the relationship with her. And I was better just approaching people. I used to look at it, when I was in consulting, I was in the LA office and we had 7 people there versus 200 in San Francisco. So every time I was up here, you never knew the consultants would be out, but the partners always had to go to lunch. So I'd go to the partners' offices about 11:45 and say, would you like to go to lunch? Well, they were going to lunch with other partners, so I'd go to lunch with 3 partners, you know, and the consultants would look at me and I'm going, well, they have to go to lunch too. And so I got to talk to the partners so they knew who I was. And so I think that if you reach out to people and start establishing those relationships, even with executives, they have to eat lunch, they're going to the gym, you know, they've got the same, you know, parental issues you might have. And it's just starting that conversation so you can say, hey, can I ask you a question? But it's starting to develop a relationship so you can ask them those questions if you don't have that formal setup to do it. Let's,
I work
question.
for a small business that's a locally based operation that has like franchises in 5 counties. And there is a glass ceiling that's very, very, very thick in the company I work for. It's a privately held company. There really are no top women in the company. So I decided I'm just going to stay where I am and keep my head down, which is what you suggested. But trying to get, how can I say it, to have really good working relationships with men who have been groomed to work in that company is extremely difficult. We have something they call a boss team that comes around and checks all the franchises to make sure that everybody's operating the way they're supposed to be. And they're actually very good. They're very talented. I find it extremely difficult to talk to these men because their attitude is like, don't talk to me. You know, you don't know what you're doing. I've been with the company almost 9 years. So, and I've worked in 3 different franchise operations. So it's like, where do I go from here? I know it's time to move on, and yet I'm learning as I'm sitting there. I'm helping them transition. I'm doing some great work, and I'm learning a lot. So when I'm not, 15 anymore. So where do I go from here?
Yeah, you probably have a lot of questions that we could spend 2 hours talking about. So, but I'll give you a quick one. I always like this. There was one time when, I wasn't paid much when I went from consulting into product management because I took too low a salary. So I got an offer for 50% more to go over to Oracle, to the arch nemesis. And so Scopus decided to keep me instead and give me a 50% raise. So if you ever need negotiating around that, just ask me and I'll help you with it. But anyway, I got a 50% raise. But it was interesting. One of my friends said, Kathy, I could tell the exact day that you checked out. Well, there's an interesting thing. When you do check out, I'm not saying check out, but it's coming back in with a different viewpoint. Because if you approach a job, and I'm going to give you an example of a woman I talked to maybe 6 months ago, that the company, she wanted to go into marketing, but she had come from finance, and the company was either going to lay her off or she had to go into finance. So guess what? You go into finance. But I said, well, what if you go into finance, but do things that'll support you so you prepare yourself for marketing? So and have that attitude. Now you won't go in dreading finance. You're going to go in there, what can I learn? Because she was supporting the sales team. Guess what? Sales team and marketing work close together. So how do you become a best friend of sales while working in finance so that you can move back into marketing and be a step ahead? So what I would do is put on that perspective of, I'm really learning a lot. What do I want to learn that gets me ahead, and how can I learn it here, and seek out those opportunities to learn? It'll put you in a different frame of mind approaching that same job. You know, those guys that are coming over around and evaluating go, I'm really appreciating what you do and how tightly a ship this is. You know, what can I help you with to make sure we're performing better, and learn what they're doing? And when you start taking that kind of attitude of this kind of learning environment, all of a sudden it puts a different frame of mind on how you approach your job. Because now you're going, what can I do to improve myself and learn that sets me up for the future? We have a raffle, a drawing.
All right. And just wanted to check, was there any questions from the distributed sites? If there were, unmute and speak up. All right.